It's developing quite widely, and then perhaps later on into the early hours of Tuesday morning, some rain and some patchy snow across southern parts of England. Temperatures well below freezing under the clear skies, -5 to -8, possibly even a little lower. So into Tuesday, an icy start for many. Snow across northern Scotland, these filtering their way southwards around coastal areas into Northern Ireland and northern England. Patchy rain and snow still possible across some southern counties. This will move away, a cold feeling day for everyone. Remaining cold over the next few days, but perhaps just signs of something a little milder by Friday.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
New director on the show, Andreas. He's a brave man. Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. In my big opinion, the WhatsApp messages from Matt Hancock show the pandemic response was about headlines, not health, and they laughed as they locked us down. More fool us for submitting to government tyranny. Never again. That's my big opinion, and it's coming. My Mark Meets guest is Robin Tilbrook, the chairman of the English Democrats. With relentless talk of Scottish independence and with Plaid Cymru in Wales enjoying growing support, we'll be asking why English independence is not a greater talking point. Would you like to see an English Parliament, for example? In the big question, did Labour fail to provide opposition during the pandemic? We'll debate that with Anne Widdecombe and a former Labour government minister. And in my take at 10, Boris Johnson won power with 3 magic words. Get Brexit done. Well, Rishi Sunak can do the same with 3 new ones. Stop the boats. Lots to get through, but first the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
A very good evening to you. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Matt Hancock wanted to, quote, frighten the pants off everyone to ensure public compliance with constantly changing COVID rules. Leaked WhatsApp messages in the Sunday Telegraph show how the former Health Secretary and his team discussed how to utilise fear and guilt to make people obey lockdowns. The Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, told us Mr Hancock's political career is over.
I think the key thing is that he accounts for himself in front of an inquiry. It comes back to this point, doesn't it? Why we need this inquiry to take place quickly. A lot of people lost their lives. There's a lot of people who think that the way in which lockdowns operated has had long-term implications on all kinds of fronts. Everybody wants an inquiry because everybody wants to be able to see the evidence, to be able to debate it properly and calmly, and it's why we need to get on with it.
Well, in separate leaked messages, Boris Johnson was described as a nationally distrusted figure by the UK's top civil servant, who feared the then Prime Minister would be ignored by the public if he introduced new lockdown rules. Simon Case was appointed Cabinet Secretary by Mr Johnson in September 2020. A spokesperson for Boris Johnson has declined to comment. Next week's remaining ambulance strikes in England have been called off. The Unite union, which represents 3,000 workers, has entered pay talks with the government. Unite joins Unison and GMB, which say there's been a huge shift in the government's position. The strikes were to take place tomorrow and Wednesday. 2 men arrested following the shooting of a police officer in Northern Ireland have been released. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was shot several times in Omagh last month. He remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital. 6 other men who were arrested and questioned as part of the investigation have been released previously. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have received an official invitation to King Charles' coronation. That despite ongoing tension with other members of the royal family over disclosures in Harry's memoir. A spokesperson for Harry and Meghan told GB News a decision on their attendance, though, will not be disclosed at the present time. The coronation will take place on the 6th of May. And Liverpool broke Manchester United's hearts and a host of records with an historic 7-0 win against their arch-rivals at Anfield. Mo Salah scored twice to become Liverpool's record Premier League goal scorer. Cody Gakpo and Darwin Núñez added 2 each as Liverpool scored 6 in the second half. It is their greatest ever win against Manchester United and United's heaviest defeat against any team since 1931. TV online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now, it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
My thanks to Aaron Armstrong. He's with me all evening. He's back at 9. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Put your feet up and relax because we've got a great 2 hours ahead. Hopefully you've got the kids in bed now. Let's pretend it's not a school night and let's have some fun and a good old debate along the way. In my big opinion, the WhatsApp messages from Matt Hancock show the pandemic response was about headlines, not health, and they laughed as they locked us down. More fool us for submitting to government tyranny. Never again. That's my big opinion. It's just coming. In the big question, I'll be asking if Keir Starmer and the Labour Party failed to provide effective opposition during the pandemic. Tory legend Anne Widdecombe will be here debating that with former Labour Minister Sean Woodward. My Mark Meets guest is Robin Tilbrook, the leader of the English Democrats. With relentless talk of Scottish independence and with Plaid Cymru in Wales enjoying growing support, we'll ask why English independence is not a greater talking point. If you're watching or listening in England, would you like an English Parliament? In my take at 10, Boris Johnson won power with 3 magic words. Get Brexit done. Rishi Sunak can do the same with 3 new ones. Stop the boats. We've got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction. And in the news agenda with broadcaster and former Tory Minister Edwina Currie, we'll be asking if Rishi Sunak's health check plans will be enough to halt the mass exodus from our workforce. Currently, 6.5 million people of working age are not active in the economy. We'll discuss that, reacting to those stories and many more. My all-star panel, author and journalist Hilary Freeman, political editor of The Spectator magazine, James Heal, and social commentator and political broadcaster, Lynn May. Most importantly, I want to hear from you throughout the show. mark@gbnews.uk. The best part of the show is when you get in touch. So for the next 2 hours, big debates, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's have a busy old Sunday night, and let's start with this. Following the bold journalism of the Daily Telegraph newspaper and the extraordinary courage of journalist Isabel Oakeshott, we have the truth about the government's pandemic response, which is that it was motivated by headlines, not health, by politics, not science. The latest shocking revelations from the leaked WhatsApp messages from the then Health Secretary Matt Hancock are telling. They show that this duplicitous man, who can't even be trusted by his own wife, sought to capitalise on a new strain of COVID-19, COVID's difficult second album after the Alpha variant. All in order to scare the bejesus out of us so we would comply with COVID measures, which at the time were controversial and which have since aged more badly than Joe Biden. Many long feared that COVID lockdowns, masks and illiberal vaccine mandates were a disastrous mistake. I said as much whilst broadcasting on the national radio and TV airwaves throughout the pandemic. I've been on air non-stop for the last 3 years. And I was one of the people holding the government to account, looking at data, asking for evidence to justify devastating and illiberal measures. I even caused an international news story when I chopped up a face mask early in the pandemic on my old radio show. And that was a viral video that more or less broke the internet. Another moment of scepticism and critical judgment that has aged pretty well. Notwithstanding 4 decades of research into masks before the pandemic that suggested they would never stop a virus like COVID, notwithstanding the real-world data that shows that countries that masked didn't show a discernible advantage over those that didn't, notwithstanding the latest Cochrane review, the most authoritative study to date, which suggests that masks did nothing other, of course, than impact people's lives and their mental and physical well-being, and, of course, polluting our oceans into the bargain, notwithstanding that all of the medical experts told us not to wear a mask early in the pandemic as it wouldn't help. If none of that is enough to snap you out of your brainwashed attachment to the idea that any of this nonsense was worth the damage caused, just look at these WhatsApp messages. And Boris Johnson's decision to mask children all day long in the classroom, not because of data, not because of evidence-based science, but because he didn't want to fight with Scotland's pint-sized dictator, Nicola Sturgeon. They covered our faces to cover their arses. With a vanishingly low infection fatality rate, COVID-19 was the first virus that had its own marketing department, with the government deploying terrifying behavioural scientists like declared communist Susan Michie to make us think we were in the grip of the bubonic plague. In the end, we didn't have to be scared of this virus, which was really just a threat to a tiny proportion of the population, those with serious comorbidities and some in deep old age. So what have we learned from this whole sorry affair? Well, that we were idiots for going along with these policies in the first place. 3 weeks to flatten the curve was the foot in the door that they needed. That's where we went wrong. And now we're paying the price. We've got a wrecked economy, eye-watering national debt, damaged kids, and a sadder, poorer, sicker, and more divided society. Oh, and an NHS waiting list of 7 million people, which surely poses a greater threat to human life than the virus ever could. But of course, it's for your health. Follow the science, folks. In the course of the pandemic, our leaders and we ourselves forgot our Western values. Free speech was crushed for anyone who questioned the madness of it all, for whom none of this made sense. Human liberty was trashed, with people being told when they can and can't see their own families, or even say goodbye to loved ones who had passed away. Going out to work and providing for your family ceased to be a human right. Here's where we went wrong, as we were whipped into a frenzy of fear by Matt Hancock and a cabal of politicians, government scientists and high-profile TV and radio personalities. Where did we go wrong? Well, we listened to them and we took the bait. We allowed ourselves to be manipulated, gaslit, bullied and brainwashed. Who could blame us? After all, we believed what we were told and we just wanted it to be over. And that was the problem. We complied to make it end, but our compliance meant it never would. Just as those idiotic and unscientific vaccine mandates achieved nothing other than creating a new generation of never-vaxxers, public trust in politicians, in scientists and in establishment media will never recover. And why should it? You know you're in trouble when numpties like me were right all along. Next time, we've all got to step up. We must choose evidence-based science. We must choose actual data. We must choose a diversity of views. We must choose personal and bodily autonomy. And next time anything like this happens, don't just roll over and swallow the BS. Choose life, choose freedom, choose liberty, and say no to tyranny. Drunk on power and taxpayer-funded red wine, our leaders controlled us, bankrupted us, destroyed our mental and physical health, and they found the whole thing hilarious. They laughed as they locked us down. There are no words. Actually, I can think of two. Never again. Now, what's your view? The government would argue that without the COVID measures, lockdowns, face coverings, vaccine mandates, other interventions, many lives would have been lost. And they would argue that these measures were carried out by other countries around the world and that ensuring the NHS did not become overwhelmed was their priority, something they would argue these measures achieved. That's not my view, but what's yours? Mark at GBNews.uk, reacting to my big opinion. My wonderful expert guests tonight, we've got journalist and author Hilary Freeman. James Heal, a brand new star on Mark Dolan tonight, the political correspondent at The Spectator, and social commentator and political broadcaster Lynn May. Lynn, let me start with you. Your reaction to these WhatsApp messages. I believe that part of the problem was our compliance.
No, I agree with you. However, and I know people are going to look at their TV screen and they're going to be shouting at it, because I initially felt quite sorry for the government because it seemed as though they couldn't win. When it came to locking us down, everyone was, angry at the thought of having to stay in their house, not being able to go out, go to work. But then, if it was the opposite, people were angry at that also. So either way, they couldn't win. But now we've seen these WhatsApp messages, I'm absolutely disgusted. And as much as I cannot stand Matt Hancock, the dweeb that he is, I think we need to look at the bigger picture, because even though he was the health secretary, he's not a scientist, he's not a doctor. Where did this information come from? And if you look at the word deploy, that's usually relatable to something military, a weapon. We want to know the truth. And if Matt Hancock really wants to do something of any worth in his measly life, he'll come out and tell us the truth about what they really were doing with COVID.
James Heal, welcome to the show. Hugo Rifkind, who writes for The Times, was on Twitter today, and he said, well, actually, he might not have appreciated the tone of Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages, but his argument was, look, of course he wanted to ramp up the fear because the NHS was threatened with being overwhelmed and this deadly virus was killing people. So his argument was that ultimately the ends justified the means. Did they?
Well, this is something the inquiry is going to have to consider, but what I would say is that one aspect of this which has been particularly concerning was the use of nudge theory throughout the pandemic and the way in which was used in order to ensure compliance.
What is nudge theory for the ignorant like me that don't know?
No, of course, no. It's how sort of soft measures can try and persuade public opinion to try and go along with a certain agenda of a certain way. So you look at different policies. It's often used in public health to encourage things like healthy eating.
Right.
But in this case, they were using it to an extent which you hadn't really seen before. Things like social media, things like government posters. You may remember the posters about, look him in the eye, look her in the eye, and that led to a real sense of fear. And that use of fear, I think, is not probably properly understood yet. And so what I hope that with the release of these messages is going to do is try and look at that as an issue, rather than debating around necessarily about did we lock down a week too soon or a week too late, looking at some of the tools that we used in this and whether they were proportionate, appropriate and sensible, and whether they should be used again.
Indeed, we're going to return to these WhatsApp messages, the lockdown files with the papers at 10:30 because there are more explosive revelations coming, let me tell you. But Hillary, I want to show this to you because in my big opinion, I've said that they laughed at us while they locked us down. Take a look at this exchange between Matt Hancock and his media advisor, Damon Poole. Now, Damon Poole has said, no promises, but I'm trying to land a Bill Gates endorsement of the platform. Matt Hancock replied, tell him that considering how many people I'm getting his chips injected into me, he owes me one. And Damon Poole replies, ha ha. Well, be still my aching sides, Hillary Freeman. They laughed as they locked us down. Here, belittling people with understandable fears and concerns about the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, the whole conversation comes across like a group of public school boys playing at politics and suddenly getting absolute power over people's lives and just showing what they feel about the British public, which is, you know, they look down on us, basically. I don't think anybody's, to be fair, anybody's WhatsApp messages would look very good if they were published. But, you know, to know that this is what they thought of us, yeah, it's pretty shocking, really.
Hillary Freeman, James Heal, Lynn May, Mark Dolan tonight boasts the freshest and best commentator voices on the national television and radio airwaves. They'll be back a little later in the hour. Now, in the news agenda with Edwina Currie, will Rishi Sunak's health check plans halt the mass exodus of many people from the workplace? Did you know there were 6.6 million people of working age who don't work? How do we fix it? We'll discuss that with no-nonsense Edwina Currie later. My Mark Meets guest is Robin Tilbrook. He's the chairman of the English Democrats. He wants English devolution and an English parliament. Is that a good idea? What about English independence? Would you vote for it if you're watching in England? But next up, in the big question, we're going to return to COVID. Did Labour fail to provide effective opposition during the pandemic? We'll debate that with Tory icon Anne Widdecombe and top Labour insider Sean Woodward. Don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a big reaction to my big opinion, Mark at gbnews.uk. We've had so many emails in relation to this. Where shall we start? Richard Mark, scaring people is never acceptable as any government tactic. Matt Hancock trying to terrify people with a new Delta Plus rewards programme variant was appalling. The public will not lay down and take any of that BS ever again. How about this? Lynn says, Mark, just like Labour, you're all criticism with no suggestion about what you would do instead. I'm not saying the government was right, but what would you have done in the circumstances? Well, Lynn, what I would have done is informed the public of the risk, offered them various mitigations that they could voluntarily take, such as stay at home, don't go to work, have Zoom meetings, wear a mask if you somehow believe they work, but it's entirely up to you. That was the policy of the Swedish government. And since 2020, they've had lower excess deaths than many of their European neighbours. I believe they've won the argument. But look, it's all about opinion. And Lynn, you're right to hold me to account. So do keep that frame of mind coming, because we do like to be exposed to a bit of scrutiny on this show. And also, the show is the home not just of big opinions, but diverse opinions. So what do you think? Let me know, Mark, at gbnews.uk. Andreas, can I have a sting, please? It's time now for the big question, in which we tackle a major news story of the day. There has been an intense focus on the government's pandemic response, which will receive further scrutiny when a full inquiry begins. However, if mistakes were made, do the media, who often served as cheerleaders for lockdowns, and perhaps more importantly, the opposition, share some of the responsibility for any of the impacts of the COVID measures, particularly given the fact that Keir Starmer waved through most of the government's rather draconian COVID policies. I don't remember many Labour MPs or their leader asking for a cost-benefit analysis of lockdowns or asking for evidence-based science around masking, bubbles or stay-at-home orders. So that's tonight's big question. Did Labour fail to provide opposition during the pandemic? Now, unfortunately, we're having trouble getting a line to Anne Widdecombe. She's away at the moment and her connection isn't great. So, Anne, we miss you, but I'm delighted to welcome former Labour minister and top Labour Party insider Sean Woodward. A warm welcome to Mark Dolan tonight, Sean.
Good evening.
Great to have you on the programme. Do you think that Labour should have done more by way of opposition during the pandemic?
No, I think the Labour Party did what you would want them to do. And let's just, first of all, recall the circumstances. None of us knew what was happening in those first few months of 2020 when all of this took off. And the right thing to do was what the Labour Party did, which was to rally around the government at the time, which is to be supportive of the measures that were being introduced. Nobody knew whether they were the right measures or the wrong measures. What we did know is that very large numbers of people were dying around the world. And I think, Mark, we should just for a moment reflect on just how across the world, the United States, every European country, every night we were almost frightened to watch the television because we would learn about the next round of deaths that had taken place. Could we get ventilators? Could we get PPE equipment? And at those moments of national crisis, and they were international crises, the right thing for the opposition to do is not to be playing games. It's actually to be trying to support the government. And that's what initially happened. Now, what then happened, of course, was that by April of 2020, Keir Starmer becomes leader of the Labour Party and starts to ask questions. When's the lockdown going to end? Do we have the right PPE equipment? And actually, I think what you need to recall here is that quite quickly we were asking questions about the shortage of PPE equipment and very real concerns about the nurses and the lessons that we seem to be learning rather quickly about there not being enough equipment to protect our healthcare staff through all of this.
I don't remember Keir Starmer, Sean, sorry to interrupt you, I don't remember Keir Starmer asking when lockdowns would end. He was Captain Lockdown. He berated the government for not locking down sooner, a policy that's been dismissed by many eminent scientists around the world, including Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from the University of Stanford, the medical school there. He wanted a circuit breaker lockdown, and he called Freedom Day in July of 2021 reckless.
Yeah, look, Mark, we can get lost here if we're not careful in recognising the difference between being in government and being the opposition. The job of the opposition is to ask questions. It wasn't as if there was a group
Labour
of
didn't
people
ask questions, Sean.
Mark,
When did Keir Starmer ask for a cost-benefit analysis of lockdowns? When did he ask about the economic damage? When did he say that children would be damaged from school closures? Why did he not fight for schools to stay open? Sean, I can't find anyone that will defend school closures now.
I really think, Mark, you're losing the context of actually what was going on at the time. Nobody knew the answer. We were all trying to find answers. And I think, again, you can shake your head and you can deny me the opportunity to try and say what I would like to say here. When you have a crisis of the proportions of COVID around the world, the first thing you actually want to do is not play games with people's lives. What we're learning from these WhatsApp messages that are coming out today is that the games that were being played inside the government are terrible games. They're wicked games that were taking place. There is no way that Keir Starmer or anybody else in the opposition knew exactly what was going on inside Downing Street. What we now know is that we had a Prime Minister in the form of Boris Johnson who was busy having parties and booze-ups when he was telling the rest of us that we had to be locked down. These are moments when you take a Prime Minister in good faith to start with.
Well, I don't know whether Boris Johnson...
The opposition, of course, when you have superior information, is to behave very differently. But what we were trying to do was to do our best at supporting the country in a major crisis, but at the same time trying to ask questions. You're saying there weren't enough questions. You would have liked them a few weeks earlier. We can all be wise after the event. But
I would have liked, Sean... I would have liked questions.
A gross manipulation of the facts that was taking place by the Secretary of State at the Health Department, the Cabinet Secretary, who cannot be exonerated in any way from what we're learning. But crucially, Mark, all of this at the end of the day, this childish, puerile game that was being played by Matt Hancock, who was jealous of how Rishi Sunak looked one day, trying to withhold information, manipulate it another. This was a culture created by a Prime Minister who allowed all of this to happen.
Now, Sean Woodward, on that we can agree. On that, we can agree. We have a landing zone for this conversation. I think the culture at number 10 was a problem. I can't be sure that there were parties happening at which Boris Johnson was present, because that whole thing was investigated by the current Chief of Staff of the Labour Party, so I can't imagine she was that neutral. But here's the thing. Here are the brass tacks.
No, hang on.
Sean.
This is really interesting that you said what you've just said. She is not the current Chief of Staff of the Labour Party.
Well, she's been appointed. She's the Chief of Staff elect.
Very stickily about facts. So you need to, at one moment here, just hold the mirror up to yourself. You've just said something to your viewers which is not true. Sue Gray is not the current Chief of Staff of
She's
the Labour
about to
Party.
be. She's a Chief of Staff elect.
She must do a job, and when she's released from the job that she's been doing, she'll be able to take that responsibility up.
All right. Well, I'm happy to stand corrected, but I think my viewers and listeners can make their own mind up about that one.
Job this evening in asking these questions, but how do you assist any of your viewers by feeding them a deliberate lie? She is.
Well, wait a minute. Are you really, Sean Woodward? Are you going to die on this hill? Sue Gray has been appointed Chief of Staff to the Labour Party. I'm calling her the Labour Party Chief of Staff. I mean, she's been appointed. Her post will begin, what, next month? After her gardening leave? Effectively, she's the Chief of Staff, and I'm sure she's begun work.
No, she will become the Chief of Staff.
What's the difference?
Well, the difference is she's not been doing the job.
All
what
right,
you
well,
were
she's the
trying to do was
effective-
muddy the idea that an investigation into this Prime Minister was being done by a current Chief of Staff of the Labour Party.
No,
That's not
I
the
didn't.
case.
No, Sean, I didn't say that she was Chief of Staff during the Partygate investigation, which is long gone. I just pointed out that she's now effectively, or she's soon to be, the Chief of Staff. I don't think we have to get trapped in the long grass of that one. Why did Keir Starmer... Sean,
it's one of the
Sean,
things that's going to matter here. No, Mark, please. One of the things that's going to matter here is that we actually do try and get to the facts. And all I'm trying to say to you is we can all sling things around, but it's incredibly important right now because at the end of the day, we're talking about a number of families who lost loved ones, who lost mothers, fathers, brothers, sons, friends, in the course of something that was handled by a group of people who, insofar as they knew what they were doing, were manipulating it wildly. I don't think there can be any possibility that you could be saying that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in opposition were wildly manipulating things they knew to be other than the case.
Now,
what we're learning from these WhatsApp messages is the government was deliberately manipulating the truth.
Sean, we were making progress before we got to Sue Gray and Partygate. We found a landing zone, which is the culture at number 10. I've been, for 2.5 years, 3 years now, berating Boris Johnson for these lockdowns, unscientific. There is a peer-reviewed study suggesting that cases were falling before each of the 3 national lockdowns. I want to know why Keir Starmer didn't speak up against policies which have brought our national debt to £2.1 trillion, why he didn't speak against policies which have created an NHS waiting list of 7 million people, why he didn't speak up against a policy of masking children in school without any evidence that would move the dial, and we had no since evidence that that did work, and indeed school closures altogether. Not a squeak out of Keir Starmer in relation to these damaging measures. You say we didn't know anything about the virus. We knew pretty much from day one the infection fatality rate of COVID-19 was vanishingly low, mainly impacted the over 80s with comorbidities, and we treated it like the bubonic plague, most of all by Keir Starmer.
I'm sorry,
Name one of those things that's not true. Can you point out the inaccuracy there of any of what I've said?
I can either try and answer your question or I can just listen to you asking more.
Good, but can you find the inaccuracies in what I've said, please?
This was not confined to an illness of over 80s people who died.
It's the average age of death in the UK.
I know
80.
people who died who were younger than that.
Sure.
I have lost friends, Mark, who were in their 30s and 40s. I will not allow
that's very
you
sad, but that was not symptomatic of the disease.
These people were somehow destined to die anyway. They weren't. And
I'm afraid it's misleading, Sean. It's misleading to cite cases of people in their 30s who tragically died from COVID-19. It was a disease that predominantly impacted people with a high BMI, metabolic syndrome, comorbidities, and those in their 80s. That is the fact. It was an awful disease. We all hated it. And Keir Starmer did not speak up against any of the measures that have destroyed this country. We've screwed the country up, and Keir Starmer waved it all through. Sean.
This is ridiculous. No, Mark, you are setting yourself up here for something which is just not true. There are many people who are not in their 80s, not destined to die. And when you talk about their BMI levels, I honestly think if you went to the Royal College of Nurses and you said to this group of people that the ones who died amongst them were destined to die anyway because they either had a high BMI rate or they were very old.
Sean, don't put words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth. It seems that, as with the Labour Party, you're ignoring the science. It predominantly impacted older people with comorbidities. But what we did is we paid healthy people to stay at home, and we destroyed the economy. We borrowed £500 billion. We closed once viable businesses. We destroyed the mental and physical health of young people. All of that signed off by your mate, Keir Starmer.
Excuse me, Mark, everything changed once we had vaccines. Before we had vaccines,
where'd you get that from?
The idea that you have some superior knowledge that
the virus was predominantly mild from day one. That is a direct quote from Chris Whitty.
I don't care who you've got quotes from that you want to cite. What I can say to you is that before we had... No, Well, throwing your hands in the air in some supercilious way, somehow demonstrating to people that you're superior to all of us, is absurd. The entire world struggled through 2020 to find a way of tackling this. And
Sweden
people
didn't.
did their best.
Sweden did not struggle. Sweden had no lockdowns. They kept their businesses open. They kept schools open. They've got densely populated cities. They have 1 million people of foreign extraction, so it's a diverse population. And they've got among the lowest excess death rates in Europe since 2020. They didn't have any of these measures that we had. Why?
And then tell me what happened before they used the vaccines. And when Sweden reopened, I seem to remember they suddenly started experiencing quite high numbers of deaths. Or are you ignoring that?
OK, well, listen, Sean, we've had a great old ding-dong. I'd like to give you the last word. Please complete this brilliant conversation with your final thoughts.
My final thought is very simple. The job of the opposition is to ask questions. The government were in charge. And what we're learning today from these WhatsApp messages is that this is a group of kids who were playing a schoolboy's game with a prime minister who was not being responsible. And it's utterly sickening to learn what seemed to be going on in the Department of Health and Downing Street. We gave them the benefit of the doubt, and it seems right now that we have very, very serious questions to ask of these people.
And on that, I completely agree. Sean, you're a star for being on the show. I loved our debate. It was fascinating.
Very much indeed.
And do come back soon. A fascinating debate. And look, I'd love to know what you think. Do you agree with Sean Woodward? Am I underplaying the threat of the virus? How little we knew at the start? Please be brutal with me. Whether you agree or disagree, let me know. I think Sean's a great sport for coming on. And I did enjoy our fulsome debate. Mark at gbnews.uk. Let me know your thoughts. More to come. Remember the golden rule of this show. We don't do boring. Not on my watch, which I think you've just seen there. I think you've got Edwina Curry next, and we'll talk about the nation's health. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Big reaction to my debate with Sean Woodward, former Labour government minister, in regard to whether Labour provided enough opposition during the pandemic. I agree with you, Mark. Labour did not challenge anything, says Isabel. Steve says, well done, Sean Woodward, for standing up to your nonsense, Mark. Elizabeth said, dear Mark, I like GB News, but this obsession with COVID lockdown or how it was handled, when will it end? You quote a few doctors who were not for lockdown. Why are you not quoting the millions of doctors who promoted it? Elizabeth, thank you for offering the other side. That's what this show is all about. That's what I'm all about. Hi, Mark. Labour did not do its job. I will say it's a shame you had such an old guy on Who's So Scared of Death. People die all the time. It's a shame the lefty loons can't handle that fact of life, says Arnold. And last but not least, Neil. Mark, it's obvious you were winning the conversation as your guest got rather rattled. Great save. Well, thank you very much for that, Neil. Look, I think Sean is a great sport for being on. I look forward to his next appearance on the show. Workers will be given annual health checks as part of government plans to stop people going on long-term sick leave and reduce the number of working-age Brits who are not active in the economy. Ministers believe assessments, which could include tests for blood pressure and body mass index, will help reduce the number of people leaving the labour market. The initiative is part of a wider workforce review to deal with the more than 6.6 million people who are economically inactive, a growing number of whom are over 50. Well, one of the most active people I know is former government minister and radio and TV presenter Edwina Currie. She never stops. Hi, Edwina.
Hi. Incidentally, I thoroughly enjoyed what you were up to with Sean Woodward. I'm old enough to remember when he was a Conservative Member of Parliament for Stratford-on-Avon.
There you go. So he flip-flops like the best of them. Edwina, are there really 6.6 million people who cannot work in this country of working age? I just wonder whether we need more policies to get people back to work, particularly given the parlous state of the economy.
I think everybody's very keen indeed to get people back to work, and particularly in the age groups that you've mentioned, the 55 to 64s who are not able to claim their state pension, but in many cases seem to be either claiming long-term sick and we need to get them back to work, or are claiming their private pensions. And it'll be a year or two before they discover that actually they haven't got enough private pension there, they haven't saved enough over the years, to be able to survive well into the 80s and the 90s, as we hope everybody would. So, a couple of points, if I may. First of all, it's a very good idea to extend having health checks at work, and it will pick up all sorts of conditions before they get serious. That's a good idea. And I think this is aimed particularly at smaller businesses who probably can't afford to do it. But whether it should be done with government help or not, that's a moot point. But there are other aspects to all of this. I mean, for example, if we closed all the golf clubs, a lot of those people wouldn't be able to go and spend their time on the golf course. If we said, you can only have one cruise a year instead of I think a friend of mine's actually been on 9 last year, something like that. That might also have a beneficial effect.
Well, you would have to hope so. I quite like the spirit of this policy. It's about prevention of illness rather than the treatment thereof. That would be good news for the NHS. But what about the culture of this country? Are we getting lazy again? Are we becoming the lazy man of Europe, Edwina?
Well, possibly the lazy man. Quite a number of those people of working age who are not working are women who are choosing to stay at home and look after their children, or may have other responsibilities, such as looking after an elderly relative who's not well. And they, I think, are to be recognised and respected. And it's a very old-fashioned thing to do, but it's not a bad thing to do. You've got about 200,000 men who are staying home looking after children as well. And I know one of the things the government's looking at is something to do with the cost of childcare and nurseries and so on, to see whether they can ease that up. But the problem is how to stop people in very experienced positions who can afford to retire. And one of the things this government has got to do is unwind some of George Osborne's attack on pension funds, which started back in 2015, I think. And now you get to a stage, you haven't got there yet, Mark, but hopefully you will. You get to a stage where you're at what your pension fund is actually worth in real time, and you are going to be paying an awful lot of tax on it. That's not a good idea. We should encourage everybody to save. We should encourage everybody to stay at work and push up their pension funds. We certainly shouldn't be forcing them, as we are, for example, with consultants in the NHS, to retire far too early, and then they don't go back to work.
And what about benefits? Does it still pay to work?
They're looking at tweaking the universal credit system, and that probably is a very good idea. I heard a lot about Sweden from you earlier. And one of the things that Sweden's managed to do is get a lot of older people back into work. And they've done it by having a jobs agency, which is just aimed at older people. It's actually called Veteran Poolen. And it encouraged older people to come back into work, usually part-time, choosing their own hours. And you get to 60 or 75, nobody's going to tell you what to do. That's a very, very good idea. We should have something like that. But one other thing that Sweden did was make it much harder to claim universal credit and to claim the disability benefits when perhaps you were able to work. Not that you were disabled, but you were able to work. You could work part-time. That's a bit ruthless for this government to be doing before an election. But any good government worth its salt would be doing it afterwards.
Fascinating stuff. Edwina will catch up soon. The workaholic broadcaster and former government minister, best-selling author Edwina Currie. Thanks, Edwina. We'll catch up soon. Still to come in My Take at 10, Boris Johnson won power with 3 magic words. Get Brexit done. Well, Rishi Sunak can do the same with 3 new ones. Stop the boats. But next, it's my big 3 news agenda topics with my panel, including, are certain religions given a free pass when it comes to extreme views? Don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
With me reacting to the big stories of the day, journalist and author Hilary Freeman. James Heal, a brand new star on Mark Dolan tonight, the political correspondent at The Spectator, and social commentator Lynn May. Now, an Islamic schools trust that has been praised for promoting British values is allegedly facing watchdog questions after describing gay people as evil. The Charity Commission has launched a compliance case against Abu Bakr Trust after staff used social media platforms to promote anti-gay views. Now, it begs the question, are certain religions given a free pass on extreme views? Hilary Freeman.
Well, I mean, I've got an interesting take on this because I went to a religious school as a child and I was brought up very much that when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. So if you live in this country, then you follow the cultural rules of this country. And that was what you do. You don't go against your own religion, but you don't you follow the laws of the country, basically. My daughter is now at a school that is predominantly Muslim. We live in East London, and again, you know, the school tries very, very hard to make sure that things are seen as not acceptable. If, you know, there was a little boy in my daughter's class who said that it was wrong for gay people to get married, and, you know, the teacher said, no, it's not wrong. And he was told that. So whatever messages are being given at home, you know, in the school, they should be giving the right messages.
Yes, what do you think about this, James? It's a delicate topic, isn't it?
Yes, quite, and that's why you see the political sensitivity around it. I mean, with the Wakefield story and the Quran that was scuffed, I was very surprised to see one of the local Labour councillors there put out quite an inflammatory statement on the Friday last week, talking about the need for the police to get involved, talking about how this would be seen as a kind of sacrilegious act. And I went to the Labour Party and asked them to comment on this story, sent about 4 or 5 emails, heard nothing. They haven't condemned him, they haven't agreed with him, they haven't suspended the whip or anything like that. And I think it shows that there is a sort of a very difficult concern around this in terms of what, you know, political leaders are going to address in this situation. And I certainly think there's definitely a disagreement in terms of how Anglican schools, for instance, there's a lot of debate. People feel very able, for instance, to talk about how religious education is taught in Catholic and Anglican schools compared to how the schools in West Yorkshire, it seems, how they're being treated. So I think that there is a real kind of sensitivity around it, and it's very, very concerning, and no one really wants to step up and talk about it.
It's really tricky, isn't it, Lynn? What's the greater priority? British values, and the fact, obviously, it's a you know, Western democratic country, free speech, and it's a Christian country, and then respecting other faiths. How do you strike that balance?
See, I kind of understand all parts, and I love that you can go to certain big cities and there's huge diversity. If you look at the influence of diversity, even down to cuisine, it's amazing. However, when we look at law, it's very conflicting and it's very confusing, for the simple fact that religion is protected characteristic under the Equality Act and under the Human Rights Act. And if you are going to allow people to practice their faith, and in the Quran, it says that being homosexual is not in line with their faith, they should be allowed to say that because that is our law. However, if we're also going to have all-inclusive of, you know, we need to ensure that we are being kind and protective and inclusive to people that want to have lifestyles or who are homosexual, then you see the law is conflicting. Now, when you talk about are some religions, do they get a pass and other religions don't, then we need to really have a look at the religious holy books. Just because now Britain takes on a secular approach, if we look at the Bible is not much different to the Quran when it comes to homosexuality, homosexuality. So are we now saying that these books need to be revised?
But it seems that you're allowed to be more critical or satirical of the Bible. And surely in the UK, any religious text should be open for comment.
No, I think, I'll go as far as to say, I think that's Christians' fault. Christians have allowed, to a degree, and not all, have allowed people to mock the Bible. They've allowed people, whether in comedy, film, to mock Jesus Christ, mock Mary. So if you are going to allow the culture to mock your Christianity, then you can't now expect, when people like Kate Forbes comes out and is ardent and strong in her faith, you can't then expect to have the same sort of support of Christianity as with Islam.
Yes, I mean, that's the issue, isn't it, James, where the Christians feel that it's a different set of rules for them in terms of whatever their views may be.
Yeah, I think you're right about the point about consistency, and I think that you look at what's being taught at schools right now is a huge variance. I mean, you know, the story that this reporting about the Birmingham school today was picked up by the Sunday Telegraph. The Saturday Telegraph elsewhere was talking about Conservative MPs' concerns about the sex education that's taught in school, with a huge amount of very, very liberal approaches on that issue. So some schools are being a very liberal approach to sex education, others obviously very different, where the Quran is being taught to be treated in a certain way. So, and we are now at the position where the Home Secretary feels the need to write an article in the Times saying that we don't have blasphemy laws in Great Britain because of how the divergence in this issue.
And yet you've got a West Yorkshire copper who sat there on a viral video effectively confessing that blasphemy has been committed, even though we don't have blasphemy laws. The cops are making it up as they go along. A really busy hour to come. It's been a busy hour, but we've saved our best till last. In my take at 10, Boris Johnson won power with 3 magic words: get Brexit done. Rishi Sunak can do the same with 3 new ones: stop the boats. We'll discuss that. Can Rishi stop the boats? That's the big topic of the next hour. My Mark Meets guest is Robin Tilbrook, the chairman of the English Democrats. With the relentless talk of Scottish independence, what about English independence? Would you like an English parliament? We'll get to all of that, plus tomorrow's papers and my brilliant panel. Lots to get through. Don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan tonight. In my Take at 10 in just a moment, Boris Johnson won power with 3 magic words: get Brexit done. Rishi Sunak can do the same with 3 new ones: stop the boats. My Mark Meets guest is Robin Tilbrook, chairman of the English Democrats. With relentless talk of Scottish independence and with Plaid Cymru in Wales enjoying growing support, we'll ask why English independence is not a greater talking point, or at the very least, devolution. Would you like an English Parliament? Plus tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 with full panel reaction. But my Take at 10 is coming, and I'm not pulling my punches. First, the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Frighten the pants off everyone. That was Matt Hancock's plan to ensure public compliance with constantly changing COVID rules during the pandemic. Leaked WhatsApp messages in the Sunday Telegraph show how the former health secretary and his aides discussed how to utilise fear over a new strain of the virus and guilt to make people obey lockdown. Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth told us Mr Hancock's political career is over.
I think the key thing is that he accounts for himself in front of an inquiry. It comes back to this point, doesn't it? Why we need this inquiry to take place quickly. A lot of people lost their lives. There's a lot of people who think that the way in which lockdowns operated has had long-term implications on all kinds of fronts. Everybody wants an inquiry because everybody wants to be able to see the evidence, to be able to debate it properly and calmly, and it's why we need to get on with it.
In a separate leaked message, Boris Johnson was described as a nationally distrusted figure by the UK's top civil servant, who feared the then Prime Minister would be ignored by the public if he introduced new lockdown rules. Simon Case was appointed Cabinet Secretary by Mr Johnson in September 2020. A spokesperson for Boris Johnson's declined to comment. Next week's remaining ambulance strikes in England have been called off. The Unite union, which represents 3,000 workers, has entered pay talks with the government and joins Unison and GMB, which said on Friday there had been a huge shift in the government's position. The strikes were to take place tomorrow and Wednesday. 2 men arrested following the shooting of a police officer in Northern Ireland have been released. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was shot several times in Omagh last month. He remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital. 6 other men who were arrested and questioned as part of the investigation have been released previously. Now, the UK may experience the coldest temperatures of the year this week, with warnings of snow across parts of Scotland brought forward. Temperatures could drop below -10 on Monday in northern Scotland, with up to 10 centimetres of snow on higher ground. Arctic air moving over the country and down through northern England has led to a level 3 alert, which means a 90% chance of severely cold weather, leading to possible power outages and travel disruption. And Liverpool broke Manchester United's hearts and a host of records with a humiliating 7-0 win against their arch-rivals at Anfield. Mo Salah scored twice to become Liverpool's record Premier League scorer. It is Liverpool's greatest win against Manchester United in their history, and it's United's heaviest defeat against any team since 1931. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Well, I won't take sides. Liverpool, Manchester United. I've got so many viewers and listeners in the Northwest. My thanks to Aaron Armstrong, who returns in an hour's time at 11. This is Mark Dolan tonight. Still to come, We're going to have my take at 10. Boris Johnson won power with 3 magic words. Get Brexit done. Well, Rishi Sunak can do the same with 3 new ones. Stop the boats. But can he stop the boats? That's the topic of my take at 10 in just a moment. My Mark Meets guest is Robin Tilbrook, the leader of the English Democrats. With relentless talk of Scottish independence and with Plaid Cymru in Wales enjoying growing support, we'll ask, why is English independence not a greater talking point? If you're watching or listening in England, I've got a few viewers in England too. What do you think? Would you like an English Parliament? Would you like devolution? Would you like independence? Could an independent England go its own way? Plus, we've got tomorrow's front pages at 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction. Tonight, author and journalist Hilary Freeman, political editor of The Spectator, which is, by the way, the longest and oldest ongoing political publication in the world, 195 years old. Well, he's not 105, but James Heald from The Spectator is with us, and social commentator and political broadcaster Lynn May. What a dream team. A busy hour to come, plus your emails as well. Lots to get through. Those papers at 10:30, but first, my take at 10. Sometimes 3 words is enough to capture a political message. Labour isn't working, get Brexit done, and now, in my view, 3 new words that are going to potentially shape the outcome of the next election. Stop the boats. It's very telling that the cervix-free leader of the opposition, ex-human rights lawyer Keir Starmer, didn't have stop the boats on his list of 5 missions. Meanwhile, fresh from his Brexit breakthrough, which isn't perfect, but which looks likely to end the political and diplomatic deadlock following our departure from the EU, Rishi Sunak has set his sights on the cruel business model of human trafficking, one that sees as many as 1,000 people entering the country illegally every day. Rishi Sunak's new bill to end the Channel migrant crisis promises to outlaw all forms of asylum claims from those who arrive by small boats, and it aims to prevent migrants who arrive illegally from using human rights to remain. Many people complain that we don't see enough of Rishi Sunak. Well, we've had our fill of showmen at number 10. If Sunak is tucked away in his flat at number 10, quietly working through the many problems this country has, and through attention to detail, tenacity and plain hard work getting them solved, then as far as I'm concerned, he can stay as invisible as he likes. Because in the end, the British public will always reward a Prime Minister who gets things done. We don't need photo opportunities. We don't need press releases. We don't need publicity stunts. We don't need fancy speeches. We need action. No more so than in the case of these illegal migrant crossings, which are a humanitarian, economic and national security disaster. Britain is a global beacon of diversity and tolerance. We are arguably the most welcoming, tolerant and open nation in history. But we will not be mugged off. There must be due process, systems, a procedure, not the unedifying and deeply troubling sight of migrants crossing in flimsy boats, chucking their phones and documentation into the water, and sometimes running for the hills when they land on our shores to where, God only knows. It's also worrying when you see people being picked up by a UK contact in what is possibly a global criminal infrastructure. There are plenty of loophole lawyers who want to gerrymander the system in favour of these cruel gangs and their victims. But it's my view that the public have had enough. And what may have been a fringe concern, largely among communities impacted, it's now an issue that has entered the political mainstream. Enough of the British public believe it's wrong, impractical and even dangerous to see these chaotic arrivals every day. And I believe that placing this issue at the top of his hot list was a political masterstroke for Sunak. Fixing it could produce a political miracle. Top politics professor Matthew Goodwin tweeted this yesterday. He said, "I've spent much of the last 3 weeks sitting in focus groups in the Red Wall. The next general election is definitely not a foregone conclusion." It's all about those 3 words, stop the boats. If Sunak achieves that, there will be no stopping him. It's my view that the illegal migrant crossings are an economic, social, national security and humanitarian disaster. We've got to fix it. People are dying in the Channel. It's a tragedy. It's just not how we do things. Britain is welcoming, but let's do it properly. That's my view. But what do you think? Now, supporters of Labour would argue that they couldn't possibly do a worse job than the Tories in relation to illegal migrant crossings. And Keir Starmer has said he will review the whole issue from top to bottom and engage with the French to get a deal to sort this. So what do you think? Mark at gbnews.uk, reacting to my take at 10. We have journalist and author Hilary Freeman, a political correspondent, the political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal, and social commentator and political broadcaster Lynn May. James, let me start with you. Can Rishi Sunak stop the boats?
It will be difficult, but he can certainly make a big dent in that 45,000 coming every year. We've had a lot of talk over the last 2 years or so from people like Priti Patel, Boris Johnson, but this is the chance for Rishi Sunak to really try and get one of his 5 pledges done. It's an issue of huge concern to 29 Tory voters. He knows the parliamentary party will want him to get it done, and I think we're going to see the legislation on Tuesday to show that working in tandem with things like Rwanda will be hopefully the solution that the Conservatives need in order to try and win back those voters for the next election.
Do you agree that the Red Wall is not settled? That's certainly the view of Matthew Goodwin, who is a respected expert on the Red Wall and top politics professor.
Yes, this weekend The Spectator did some polling of each of the 5 pledges of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, and on that, the clear blue water, the clear dividing line between the two was the small boats, and that's because, as you were saying at the start, the loophole lawyers, I think a lot of Tory 2019 voters think of Keir Starmer as one of those loophole lawyers. They think that crime and immigration is certainly an issue on which they can hit him with, and I think that if you're going to see all the sort of activist groups come out against this and a lot of the Labour Party come out against this, that's going to be music to the ears of a lot of people in CCHQ and Number 10, because they want to make this a clear dividing line ahead of the next election between the two parties.
Indeed. Hilary Freeman, we've always accepted people into this country, people fleeing all sorts of dreadful threats in their homeland, but this must be done through legal routes. What's your view on whether Sunak can and indeed should stop the boats?
Well, I don't think that sending people to Rwanda is the answer. Rwanda, a place where people are actually making asylum claims from. It's not... This is our problem. It's our country's problem. We shouldn't be shipping people off to other countries for them to deal with. And actually, we deal with a far fewer number of migrants and asylum seekers than other European countries do. I think we've got a real kind of island mentality here that we don't want anyone to come. And yes, we always have accepted refugees and genuine refugees and asylum seekers, but actually it's never been easy for people to come here. And I think anybody who gets in a boat with their baby is absolutely desperate, and we should be giving them our sympathy, not trying to push them off somewhere else.
Lynn May, what's your view on this? Do you think that it could move the dial for Rishi Sunak if he stops the boats?
Sorry, I'm just going to have to agree on some of those previous points. Last year, 45,000 people came into this country, and you've said that it's not easy for people to come into this country. There are multiple people coming in now to assist our NHS because we have a lack of nurses and doctors, and they're coming here with ease. I've met so many recently. So for us, it's ludicrous to suggest we do not allow people in here. And I'm sick to death of people making this also about some sort of racial discussion. Loads of countries across the world place immigration, controlled immigration, at the top of their priority. Nigeria, Barbados, Saudi Arabia. No one has just unfettered open borders. And we are paying $6 million every day to house these immigrants. And I think that the government also makes multiple excuses. Oh, we need to leave the ECHR. No, we don't, because there's previous cases to suggest that we have actually ignored European law on this. For example, in 2005, John Hurst with whether prisoners could vote. We didn't listen to Europe, so why are we listening now? Multiple excuses. It needs to stop. And if Rishi doesn't find the balls to do it, he's out.
OK, well, say it like it is. James, just because you've got your political ear to the ground, a political correspondent at the Spectator, I think sometimes diary editor as well, of that brilliant magazine. How decisive do you think it could be if Sunak's attempts to stop these boats are convincing? You know, if the Red Wall voters can see that something's happening, that he's moving the dial, Could it secure him another 5 years at number 10?
Well, I think there's a certain swathe of the electorate that sees Sunak as a sort of Mr. Fix-It, a successful businessman. Labour likes to use the Prime Minister's wealth against him, but there's a certain number of voters who actually see that as a good thing, that he's successful in business. And he's getting a bit of a reputation among, some you talk to. He saw off Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. He looks like he's been able to sell his Brexit deals successfully. And now this issue of the small boats. Of the 5 pledges he made, it's the only one that has primary legislation at the centre of it. If he can get that through Parliament for the next election, that will show a big clear dividing line between the two parties. And I think will go some way. I think the key point is that there isn't a silver bullet like Rwanda. I think that was overtalked, overplayed. But doing things like that, doing things like the agreement with Albania to return Albanians who come here, I think will go a long way to show that he is serious in trying to get this done.
James, Lynn and Hilary will be back at 10:30 sharp for the papers. After the break, I'll be revealing the results of our text poll. If Rishi Sunak can stop the boats, will it win him the next election? You, the people, have spoken. We'll get the results of that straight after this. Also, my Mark Meets guest is waiting in the wings, and he believes, it's Robin Tilbrook of the English Democrats, that we should have English devolution or possibly even English independence. All of that next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Should and can Rishi Sunak stop the boats? Will it win him the next election? Howard says, Mark, it's irrelevant for your guest Hilary to compare our migrant numbers to other countries. They're all having terrible problems and have made the same huge mistake. The other aspect to this is that I suspect that many migrants counted in other countries at the moment are transient and are passing through on their way to settle permanently here. Keep those emails coming. Mark, it's very easy to stop the boats. In 6 weeks, there would be no boats. You see France and all nations, leave port or territorial waters subject to maritime law, not the law of the land. I'll get to more of your emails shortly, but it's time for this. Oh, I'll tell you what we've got to do first. We've got to do the poll result. You can tell it's live telly, can't you? Earlier in the show, we asked you if Rishi Sunak can stop the boats. Will it win him the next election? Well, we've got the results. 47.2% said yes, but 52.8% said no. And that is marginal. And if I was Rishi Sunak, I'd think, OK, well, I've lost that vote, but not by much. So it's just possible that if he acts on the boats, it could help. OK, folks, it's time for this. It's time now for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, sports, showbiz and beyond, with relentless talk of Scottish independence and with Plaid Cymru in Wales enjoying growing support. Why is English independence, or at least devolution, not a greater talking point? Well, it's a subject close to the heart of my Mark Meets guest tonight, who is Robin Tilbrook, top solicitor, but also the leader of the English Democrats. Robin, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Notwithstanding that devolution would be revenge for Scottish devolution and Welsh devolution, does it stand up as a good idea in its own right for England?
I think it does. At the moment, we're basically subsidising Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to the tune of probably something like £70 billion a year.
Does that tie in with, in Scotland, the Barnett formula?
Yes, exactly. It is the Barnett formula. It's not only an income figure, there's also a capital figure as well. So what happens when the government decides it's going to spend 100 billion or so on HS2, you then get a vast figure coming of capital spending for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, where they haven't even got projects to put it on.
So I've got some fag packet numbers here. You're suggesting that the union is effectively costing England between 60 and 70 billion pounds a year.
Oh, at least, yes. I mean, the last time the sums were properly done, it was 69 billion pounds a year.
OK, which is about a third of the cost of the entire NHS.
Yes, and it's also at least triple, maybe quadruple the amount that we were once giving to the EU. So it's a huge sum. What do we get in exchange for it? My sort of jokey reaction is we get the bill and the blame. Because the fact is, we don't get any credit for that. People don't say, you know, England's been kind and handed out all this money. And in fact, what the British political establishment want to do is to break England up into regions. And these regions are completely bogus. There's no sort of history.
What, with local mayors and all the rest of it?
Yeah, so like the North East, for example. The reason why that crashed as a project when Prescott was trying to push for it is, of course, that they were basically trying to say that the whole of the people that live in the North East were got to be Geordies.
Yeah.
And
good luck with that.
That didn't work very well. They got 79% vote against it.
Yeah, that's it. When politicians try to superimpose their will on a community or on a region or an area, ignoring history and ignoring local culture. So what about the Union? I mean, the United Kingdom, it's a country and all countries subsidise poorer parts. What's wrong with that?
So we've got a situation where in England, the poorer parts of England get less subsidy than some of the rich parts of Scotland.
All right. Because so your argument would be England rich, Scotland poor is not the correct metric.
No, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, it's not done in a way that's fair. It's not intended to be fair. It's intended to reward Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in a way that we don't get for England.
So what's on your manifesto?
Apart from independence for England?
Yeah, I mean that's the main. Is it independence? It's not just devolution.
Well, yes. So we at one time we used to argue for an English Parliament, First Minister and government,
equivalent to Holyrood,
with at least the same powers as the Scottish ones within a federal UK. What we then found was that Westminster politicians were saying England's too big. For some reason, the idea that England is too big to have its own parliament is just ludicrous when you think, France perhaps. And also they were really talking about wanting to break England up into these regions. And so what we've come to really is that we have a choice between whether England is broken up or whether the UK is broken up. And for me, I'd rather have the UK broken up if that's the case. I don't think England has actually been the major push behind this, because obviously all the running's been done so far in these arguments by Scotland and to some extent Wales. And I think probably more in the future will be by Northern Ireland as well, because we've now had this court case that's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, in which it's been held that a key part of the Act of Union got repealed without there even being an act to make it happen. You know, it's quite extraordinary.
And that's before you get to the Belfast Northern Ireland Agreement, Good Friday Agreement, all of that. How would England fare on its own, internationally, economically, militarily?
So the main argument I've encountered over the years with particularly senior Tory politicians is what they say is that the reason why we've got to keep the Union is because it enables us to punch above our weight on the world stage. They don't come up with any other sensible argument at all, because there isn't any, really.
Because England on its own would be a rich country.
England on its own would be rich. It would be richer, in fact.
Comparable to what sort of other countries?
Well, Switzerland, Sweden, you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, one of my favourite countries. But listen, what about the emotional argument? My listeners, my viewers are watching in Belfast, they're in Cardiff, they're up in Edinburgh and Glasgow and Aberdeen. I'd hate to lose them.
Well,
do you not have an emotional attachment?
Wouldn't we still be friendly? I mean, you know, the fact is, Canada's independent. Are we not friendly with Canada? Are we friendly with Australia? They've still got the same monarchy as
but I'm sure you admired the Queen. I'm sure you admire our current king, and what they represent, what they stand for, is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. You know, it's our country. You want to break that up.
It was the Crown of England beforehand, wasn't it?
And what about the North-South divide? Would there be issues there? Would it accentuate the North-South divide if we had England alone?
No.
Wouldn't that become two countries in itself?
Of course not, because the whole point of...
Because that's how it is for Italy. They hate each other, the North and South.
Yes, but Italy only was unified in 1863. England was unified in 927. You know, we have this immense history, the longest history of any nation state on earth, of being a united entity.
A fascinating conversation. I can understand why you're engaged in it. I'm a little split because I do love our union, but you've raised some great points.
Thank you very much.
Which is what the show's all about. So do come back and see us again soon. My thanks to Robin Tilbrook, who is the leader of the English Democrats. Lots more to come, including the papers next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts
Moss?
of Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
My top producer, Mark, will be happy. We're bang on time. It's 10:30 and it's time for this. Yes, we've got tomorrow's papers hot off the press. We shall start with The Independent, and they lead with the following. Sunak vow to end small boat crossings doomed to fail, say senior Tories. This ties in with my take at 10, which you can catch now on Twitter at GB News, courtesy of Ben from our digital team. Rishi Sunak's latest pledge to stop illegal Channel migrants before the next election could backfire. According to senior Conservatives, the Prime Minister is expected to unveil new legislation this week designed to stop asylum seekers from using human rights laws to avoid deportation. But senior Tories have told The Independent they fear he has overpromised and will be forced to break his pledge to stop the boats. They also say the clock is ticking and that a political wrangle over the new laws will mean they'll be held up in Parliament and won't reach the statute book in time for polling day. Well, I just wonder whether, if he takes steps towards solving the problem, voters may acknowledge that, but time will tell. The Guardian now. Small boats clamp down unworkable, Sunak told. And police refer child sex victims to immigration. Children who have been sexually exploited and women who have been attacked by their partners are among more than 2,000 victims of serious crime reported by police to immigration enforcement. And also, anti-strike bill breaks human rights rules. Government legislation to curb strike action fails to meet the UK's human rights obligations, MPs and peers have said. So is going on strike a human right? We'll discuss that with my panel. Daily Mail. Boat migrants to get life ban. Channel migrants will be hit with a lifetime ban on entering Britain under proposed laws. The tough new measures will impose indefinite re-entry bans on all migrants who arrive in this country by irregular routes, such as small boats. Ministers hope it will send a strong message and deter migrants from crossing the Channel illegally. Anyone caught coming to Britain by illegal routes would also face a lifetime ban on securing the right to settle permanently in the UK, and it would preclude achieving British citizenship. A royal special in the Mail. Harry can have use of Frogmore if he accepts coronation invitation. Well, the bartering goes on. The FT, Beijing's 5% expansion target signals Beijing's 5% expansion target signals the end of an era of rip-roaring growth. They don't do very punchy headlines in the FT, do they? What they're saying is that China are going to aim for 5% economic growth, which is a fraction of what they used to achieve. How about the Eye now? Budget 2023. Hunt and Sunak head for new tax clash with Tory backbenches. Chancellor and Prime Minister are set to rule out a cut to corporation tax in next week's slimmed-down budget, putting them on a collision course with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Remember them. Metro, the tide is turning. A historic agreement to protect the world's oceans has been signed at the UN after 10 years of talks between 200 countries and hailed by Greenpeace as the biggest conservation victory ever. The High Seas Treaty grants protected status to 30% of international waters by 2030, compared with 1.2% now. And last but not least, the Daily Star. Seven and what is this? It's Seven and Helly. I think it says Seven and Hell. Essentially, basically, Liverpool have beaten Man United 7-0. One of the biggest results for Liverpool in many years. And also the big threes. Britain as cold as the Arctic. 3 snowstorms to hit this week, and motorists on high alert. Snow and ice are coming. Time to get those wellies out again, folks, and your bobble hat and your chunky jumper. Let's have a chat with my fantastic commentators tonight. We have broadcaster, author and agony aunt Hilary Freeman. Always cheers us up with her words of wisdom when she's on the show. A brand new star on Mark Dolan tonight, James Heal, political correspondent at The Spectator. And last but not least, social commentator and political broadcaster Lynn May. Can I talk to you about the tax cuts and the forthcoming budget, James? You'll be reporting on this at length in The Spectator. Budget 2023, right the eye. Hunt and Sunak head for new tax clash with Tory backbenches. Corporation tax set to be hiked from 19% to 25%, and they won't back down.
Yes, and this was originally agreed in March 2021, so this has been coming for a long, long time now. But as we get closer to that budget, obviously Conservative MPs are getting worried about it. We've already seen AstraZeneca, the big pharmaceutical giant, relocating over to Ireland. And a lot of Tories are feeling jumpy now. And they're saying, hang on a sec, what was the Brexit freedoms for if we're not going to use it to kind of cut taxes and be an attractive place for business? So I'm not surprised to see this. There was actually a letter signed by groups representing 150 MPs 2 weeks ago, and I think it's going to be the big, big row of the next fortnight before the budget on the 15th.
It's safety first from Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, safety first from Rishi Sunak. It's all about reassuring the international bond markets, those that lend the money to us to pay for the NHS and the police and all the rest of it, versus the aspirations of Tory backbenchers and the needs of the economy and the need for growth. So it seems like Hunt and Sunak are going to push on with this, but they haven't really won the argument within their own party, have they?
That's a very good point. And I think, actually, you talk to Tory MPs, the word they use is an overcorrection. So they say Liz Truss went a bit too far in making these, tax cuts necessarily without the kind of borrowing to back it up behind it. But now they say that Rishi Sunak's gone a bit too far the other way. And actually, they're concerned that it's actually about trying to sort of do abacus economics rather than trying to see what's going to be best for investment in the UK.
But Sunak's not stupid. I mean, he's politically quite astute. And, of course, he knows the economy. He was Chancellor for a long time, or a good amount of time throughout the pandemic anyway. And he made his money in the city. So why is he pressing on with this? Is it a case of have the pain now and then the pleasure later? Is that, or is it all about, an amazingly generous budget before the next election?
There's also the concern, I think, that UK companies have not been actually investing in talent in the UK. They haven't actually been training up staff. And I think the concern is that, if you don't have a corporation tax to deal with this, I mean, you raise other taxes to make up the balance sheet. I think if you look at the polling, and a lot of the Tory 2019 voters actually prefer spending increases rather than tax cuts. And you've got to pay for that somehow. This seems to be the solution he's allied on with the least amount of pain. But it's something, as you say, that he hasn't actually sold his party on, even though it's his baby. And that's what's really interesting here, is that they had a big fight in the cabinet with that and Liz Truss. Liz Truss lost that argument, but then won the leadership off the back of that. And that shows that Tory MPs and members are not necessarily convinced that it's the right way forward.
Lynn, what do you think's best for Britain?
I think we need to get back to what the electorate want as well. Liz Truss won because her firm message was cut taxes. Sunak is unelected. I understand he's desperate to play it safe, but then what about listening to who put the Conservatives there in the first place? And if there is going to be some sort of argument battle, then I will be Team Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, because as much as we need to play it safe, I do think Sunak has gone too far. As I always say, and I know many people will hate to hear this, we are not the Great Britain of the past in terms of the Industrial Revolution. We don't really manufacture. Our agriculture is not the best. What we have is our financial services, our insurance, and if those people decide to move, we won't have much and we need growth.
The tide is turning, Hilary Freeman. A historic agreement to protect the world's oceans has been signed at the UN after 10 years of talks between 200 countries. The High Seas Treaty grants protected status to 30% of international waters by 2030. At the moment, 1.2% of international waters are protected. We can debate net zero till the cows come home, can't we? And we can debate, climate change and all the rest of it, divergent views. But I can't think there's too many people that don't want to clean up the oceans.
No, absolutely. And funny enough, I was actually at London Zoo today and looking at all these kind of sea creatures, many of which had labels on saying, these are these are a diminishing species, they're endangered. So, yeah, I think that everybody supports this.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a good thing. And we've also, in keeping with that, we've got to clean up our own waters, haven't we? And we've got to sort out companies that pump sewage into the English Channel and off the south coast of England.
Indeed, and I think, as I said before, you know, I think that these kinds of issues, the waters should not be profit-making companies running them.
Yeah, you see it just as a public good.
Yeah.
It's infrastructure.
Yeah,
I
think so.
Shouldn't be subject to commercial pressures.
Yeah.
Fascinating story here, Lynn May, in The Guardian. Anti-strike bill breaks human rights rules. Government legislation to curb strike action fails to meet the UK's human rights obligations. The Joint Committee on Human Rights says the proposed anti-strike laws are not justified and need to be reconsidered. Is going on strike a human right?
Well, we come back to almost the small boats argument of the ECHR. Under UK law, no, it's not. It doesn't break human rights in terms of... however, Article 11 of the ECHR says that it is a human right. So will we support that or will we allow for the strike bill? But my thing is this. They didn't say they're going to stop striking. They said they're going to have a level of service which will protect the population, which is what we need. So I think this is a bit of a non-starter by The Guardian, as per usual.
I think you might be right on that, James. I won't expect you to leap in and defend The Guardian, although try if you want. The story here is that it's emergency service, isn't it? Ambulances.
Yeah, and I think actually if you look back at the debate when, I think it was 84, 85, when they were discussing whether GCHQ staff in Cheltenham should be allowed to go on strike, and the government won that fight because they said that actually, you know, if you're working in a critical industry like GCHQ, dealing with top secret government communications, you shouldn't be allowed to go on strike. I will be interested to see how this plays out. I suspect that it's going to be one of those issues where, again, we're now in the fourth year of a 5-year parliament. It might be something that gets delayed and gummed up in the House of Lords rather than actually take effect. But I wonder because, I mean, under the new Labour years, of course, Labour had previously promised to roll back all these laws on the unions and strikes and never actually touch them. I think they probably will roll this one back. But I think that, you know, it's going to be something that's played out. What I would say is interesting is that it had a majority of 70 in the Commons, and that's because all the Tory party is well behind this one.
Fascinating stuff. I'm going to come back to Hilary, James and Lynn in just a moment because we've got more papers. Marky, what are we waiting for? I think we've got the Times and the Express coming up. Looking forward to getting those front pages. Also, Donald Trump, is he on his way back to the White House? What would that mean for Britain? We'll ask Hilary about that. She's shaking with rage. James excited by the looks of it, let's see, and Lynn agnostic. We got that. Lots more stories as well. Don't go anywhere. The Express is next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Still with me, reacting to tomorrow's papers, journalist and author Hilary Freeman, the political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal, and the social commentator and political broadcaster Lynn May. Actually, I should just ask you briefly, James, you co-wrote a book about Liz Truss.
I did, yes.
With Harry Cole from The Sun.
I did indeed. I think we wrote it in 65 days and she was out in 49 days. So it's a rare thing to go from being a political biographer to a political obituarist. But,
yeah, you wrote the book in anticipation of a long and glorious political career, perhaps Margaret Thatcher Mark II. And that you'd be getting royalties on the sales for years and years. Updated editions.
I know. I think she managed.
Movie.
Yeah, she managed to cram 15 years of Margaret Thatcher into kind of 15 weeks or so.
But actually, the book made a splash for different reasons, didn't it?
Yes, quite. And it is the only book. I suppose you have a monopoly on that. So that's been.
No, I'm writing one too.
Are you actually?
Because I like writing comedies. So.
Well, you should make it the comeback. The sequel.
Listen, I think possibly. I mean, clearly there were some misjudgments in regard to the delivery, the execution of that mini budget, maybe dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
One word for it.
Maybe. But I wonder whether history might judge Truss a touch kinder than it has so far.
I think the battle will be for the party, and I think it'll be interesting to see, does she have a legacy in the party, not the country, maybe.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it was interesting, because once they reversed her tax cuts, the IMF came out the next day and said, Britain's going to have less economic growth next year.
I think the IMF's predictions are not necessarily the most reliable in some ways.
We'll take those with a pinch of salt. I did promise 2 more papers, and where should we start, Mark? Let's go to the Times, if we can. Newspaper of record in this country. Migrants on small boats to be barred from Britain, a story we've covered extensively, including in My Take at 10, which you can watch on GB News. Do you really want that job? Then say it with a winning smile. This according to new research from the Association for the Advancement of Science conference in Washington. And Johnson nominates his father for a knighthood. Stanley to become Sir Stanley. Daily Express, ending Channel migrant crisis can win election. Well, I tell you what, it's almost like they've been watching the show. Tory Deputy Chairman says new legislation is a clear dividing line with Labour. And also, William and Harry, remember them? And Harry and Meghan. Surely you can't snub King's olive branch, Harry. The King has said that he will accommodate Harry and Meghan at Frogmore Cottage if they accept the invitation to the coronation. Oh, there you go, that royal soap opera rolls on. Those are your front pages. Let's get into some of these stories now. Do you think it's appropriate for Boris Johnson to give his father a knighthood, Hilary?
Not really, no. I think it's...
Is your dad still around?
My dad is still around.
Wouldn't you give him a knighthood if you were Prime Minister?
He deserves one. Slightly different. But yeah, I sadly don't have the power to give people knighthoods. I just think it's slightly nepotistic, perhaps.
Yeah, what do you think, James? Is this the best look for our former incumbent?
Well, he put his brother in the Lords, so at least it's only a knighthood. He's not going to have a vote on things to say in Parliament. Look, yeah, I mean, you know, Stanley obviously has some claim in the sense that he was an elected representative. Sorry, at the time he was unelected, but a member of the European Parliament at the time in the 70s. But I think that, yeah, this is just Boris being Boris, really, and it's always quite hard to take, you know, a pinch of salt, the idea of a comeback when every other day it seems he's splashed on newspapers with stories like this.
Yeah, OK. Well, look, we'll move swiftly on from that. Stanley's a very nice man. He's been on the show regularly, and we used to co-present a show on Channel 4 years ago called The Last Word, and he is a good egg, so if he gets it, then congratulations. Let's have a look at another story, and it relates to EastEnders. The BBC has been criticised for screening an EastEnders storyline about a girl who becomes pregnant at just 12. In the plot, Lily's mother, Stacey, played by Lacey Turner, encourages the child to keep her baby while the parents of the father try to get her to have an abortion. Is this storyline a step too far? Hilary, you write a lot about people and their problems. You're an agony aunt.
Sure.
What do you think of this?
Well, I think the main problem with this storyline is that it's just not realistic. The number of 12-year-olds getting pregnant in this country is you could probably count in one hand. Teenage pregnancy rate is going down, thank goodness. And it's just, you know, it's just a pointless story. I don't really it's just sensationalist, really.
Right.
And from a kind of ethical point of view, from a moral point of view, I have a problem with the fact that soap operas always seem to have these teenage pregnancy storylines, and they always keep the baby. And I don't really
You feel like that's moralising or finger-wagging?
Yes, I think there is some sort
pro-life message.
There is a slight pro-life message there. And it's just not realistic. You know, a 12-year-old having a child, you know, that is going to ruin the rest of its life. The mother is the person who's going to be bringing it up. And you know, just to discount having an abortion every single time in a soap, and they go through it and they have the baby. I don't understand why this happens.
So do you think the media characterises abortion negatively?
I don't know if the media characterises it negatively. Perhaps it's something to do with it's more dramatic to have the baby. But I definitely think there is some sort of underlying pro-life argument.
Perhaps some of these script writers, they sort of equate keeping the baby with a happy ending somehow, which you would argue in a way is propaganda.
Yeah, it is, and it's not a happy ending.
Lynn?
The reason why I disagree, I do agree when you say there's hardly any teenage pregnancies.
Yeah.
Sorry, not even teenage, 12-year-old
preteen.
girls. But being, I can't believe I'm admitting this, being an avid watcher of EastEnders, if we were to cast our mind back, the storyline leading up to that of the 12-year-old daughter feeling neglected, ostracised, and how this happened because she was bored, maybe it will make some parents actually think, well, maybe I need to speak to my child more. The reality is it could happen. Where I would, again, agree with you is, you know, some sort of level of ardent approach of keep the baby, and it's her body, it's her choice. It is, but she's still 12. So really and truly, parents should have a huge involvement. It's not her choice, so to speak. But I don't think if you saying it's not realistic. When were soaps ever there to be realistic? They're not really. It's on one square. Everyone lives around the same block. It's far from reality.
It's true. They're not meant to be realistic, but they have a responsibility when they're covering social issues. Yeah, they do. I think they do.
Okay.
James, yeah, you're I know always keen to talk about pregnant 12-year-old girls. One of your pet topics.
Yeah.
Especially
your subject.
Well, it can't happen without men, can it? So
I'm used to disasters, yeah. No, what I would say is that, look, I mean, the storyline I think was interesting in that, you know, I read this article, and I learned as a result of it that we've actually had an 11-year-old who was pregnant in this country and gave birth before, which is shocking in itself.
She was raped.
Oh, yeah, I know, it's a shocking point, but I think the point of these dramas can be that they raise awareness of social issues. And you mentioned there about teenage pregnancy. 20 years ago, the UK had the worst teenage pregnancy rate in Europe, and as a result of a number of issues, campaigns, awareness of this issue, including, of course, a plotline in EastEnders. This was a huge government effort to tackle this problem, and now actually we have one of the lowest teenage pregnancy rates in Western Europe. So I think that actually things can come of these kind of storylines, as long as it's done sensitively, handled the right way. I think that, you know, EastEnders has a role to play in this.
Sure, but you could teach about contraception, you could teach about, other things, not just like, let's have the baby.
But abortion could equally damage someone in their later life. So you're saying that having an abortion is the answer, but it's not always the answer.
There's no evidence that abortion necessarily would damage someone in their later life.
I think people that would have abortions would disagree that it's had a massive effect on their mental health.
Yeah, well, I think we look at the stats for that. But, having a baby at the age of 12, that not even just in terms of education, in terms of work in the future, in terms of economics, physically, a 12-year-old is not capable of carrying a baby and giving birth to a baby without sustaining a lot of damage. They're not developed enough.
You would hope, wouldn't you, that the woman has been through full puberty before conceiving.
Yes, in no way I'm suggesting that 12-year-olds should have children. I'm not suggesting that.
Listen, it's an interesting debate and one well worth having. Let's move on to another absolutely key discussion. And it's etiquette. Jackie Vernon-Thompson is an etiquette expert, and she's been talking to the Daily Mail this weekend about how you should behave when you're staying as a guest at someone else's house. What are the rules when you're a guest at someone else's place? Jackie says that, for example, improper, wrong etiquette is using your host's shower gel, right? You should not use their sort of soaps and things like that, right?
You're supposed to bring your own.
Do you think? I mean, you go to someone's house. Can you use their shampoo? Can you use the shower gel?
Yeah. You would ask out of common courtesy. Do you mind if I? Yeah. But the answer should be yes. If someone said no, you can't. Why did you invite me over then?
Yeah, but what if they've only got a bit of Head and Shoulders left and you used the last drop?
You should have thought about that before you invited me to stay.
I mean, I know the cost of living crisis is bad, but I mean, come on, are we really penny?
I got to say, I love using other people's toiletries because then I come out of the shower and I'm, tea tree. What a lovely smell.
What's that in your hair? I don't know,
The etiquette where I live, because I live on a boat, and we have a pump-out toilet, and it's a nightmare, is that if somebody asks to use the toilet, you kind of say, well, would you want to go to the office?
Yeah, blimey, I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Makes me seasick just thinking about it. Well, look, we've put together a little quiz, an etiquette quiz for my very well brought up and polite panel. So, James, here's a brain teaser for you. Should you be replacing empty toilet rolls if one runs out?
Yes, of course. And I wish I was better at doing that and remembering certain things around the house.
What if the toilet roll is running low? Can you finish the loo roll at someone else's house and you don't see another loo roll anywhere, or do you just suffer with less?
You say politely, you point it out.
You'd finish the loo roll?
Yeah.
You monster. Would you
think
finish
you'd
the loo
worst.
roll?
Well, if I needed to.
100%.
Really?
I'm a
I'd
guest
just wear
as
another.
well.
I'd wear another pair of underpants.
No, you
Oh,
wouldn't.
God.
Rare panelled agreement.
I'd just get a copy of The Guardian and just use that to patch myself up. I'm only kidding. OK, how about this? The answer is yes. Etiquette says you should replace an empty toilet roll. Lynn, if you empty your host's dishwasher, should you put the mugs in the cupboard face down or face up?
I do face up. Depends what. I would have a look what they have.
What do you think? So why'd you say face up?
I don't like the ring when you put it down.
I don't think it's hygienic either, is it?
Yeah,
well, the answer is you're right. You've got class. It is face up. And Hillary, do you take your shoes off when entering someone's home? Yes or no?
I would ask if I should. Yes.
Yeah, because some people could be offended if you took your shoes off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what are you doing?
I would always ask, but frankly, I always hope they say no. You don't have to.
Shows how polite you are, because the answer is ask the host. Well, look, I've been the host tonight and I've loved every minute. Thank you to my wonderful panel. Wasn't James great? His first outing, first of many, and of course the brilliant Lynn and Hillary will return soon as well. Thanks for your company. I really enjoyed the last 3 shows. Thanks for listening and watching. I'm back on Friday at exactly 8 o'clock. See you then. Headliners is next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio,